Hello everybody, welcome, good evening, and I hope you're comfortable, and I hope your chairs are comfortable, and you're not sitting on anything or anybody. This is the 49th Round Table Forum. A resounding welcome to everybody. It's the 49th Forum in the Round Table Series, New South Wales Parliament House. We've been having them forever and ever, well, since early in 2006, that's forever. And we're proud of our continuity in a world of shifting sands. The topic as advertised is highly topical too. China versus the world. That sounds a really interesting, cutting-edge topic. So we won't let our tradition down. Now, three speakers on the panel are Mr. Bob Vinnicombe, Mr. Warren Wang, and Mr. John Zhao, and they will speak in that order. Questions are going to be invited from the audience, that's you, when all three speakers have finished, but not until they've finished their papers. And what you do is you raise your hand, politely and demurely. I will not miss you, I will not ignore you. And then you come up to the mic, this thing. The reason you come up to the mic is if you don't do that, your question, your valuable, unique question will not be recorded for posterity on our immortal website. And we'd like to record you for posterity. The Roundtable Forums are sponsored by Western Heritage Australia, if you didn't know that, which is a very long established political study group, discussion and study group I should say, and the primary aim is to raise public awareness on important issues for thinking people, which is you or you wouldn't be here, on issues of importance. We have no links or affiliations with any other organisation whatsoever, political, religious, commercial, promotional or anything else. And also all the money is donated by you and go to pay for the rent of this expensive little room, not so little, in Parliament House, and also on our internet expenses. Now take an enrolment form if you'd like to be part of the committee that runs this, and we love activists, and we'd love you to join, and it's on the table if you really want one. Take one if you really want one, and all invited guest speakers and all members of the audience speak for themselves alone, not for us. They don't represent us or our committee, and so whatever anyone says doesn't represent the Roundtable Forum or Western Heritage Australia. This is the last refuge of the amateur, and we welcome all opinions without fear or favour. Now, on tonight's forum, China versus the World, our first speaker is Mr. John Zhao, is Mr. Bob Vinnicombe, I beg your pardon. And Bob Vinnicombe is a campaigner for human rights in China. He runs a website, chinainformation.com.au, and his knowledge on the subject is daunting and considerable, and he's been very modest. He hasn't given me anything else to say, but I'd like you to welcome Bob Vinnicombe, please.
Thank you all for coming. Are there any Hong Kong people here? And for the Hong Kong people, this is for the Hong Kong people.
It's not raining, Bob.
This all goes back to Tuesday, 14th of September 1976, when the then Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser moved a so-called condolence motion on the death of Mao Zedong in federal parliament. And Liberal, Labor and National Party, then called the Country Party, politicians got to their feet and grovelled to the memory of and heaped praise on the communist dictator Mao. Malcolm Fraser said, quote, "For the first time in many decades, Mao Zedong gave China an effective administration, restoring a country ravaged by civil war and secured the basic necessities of life to China's people. Wrong. Mao did not secure the basic necessities of life for the Chinese people. Under his regime, millions starved to death. He did not give the country an effective administration. They already had one and he took it away and gave them oppression and hardship. A totalitarian dictatorship is not an effective administration. Gough Whitlam said, Mao was an inspiration to the Chinese people themselves. Under Mao's leadership, and largely because of that leadership, the Chinese people found the purpose and summoned the strength for a prodigious effort of revolutionary struggle. Wrong. Mao wasn't an inspiration, he was a dictator. Under communist rule, the Chinese people found only death, misery and oppression. Bill Hayden said, Chairman Mao Zedong was a great man of great achievement. Wrong. If Mao was a great man of great achievement, then so were Robert Mugabe, Pol Pot and Hitler. Doug Anthony, leader of the Country Party, said, Chairman Mao was one of the historic figures of the 20th century. He welded the difficult factions in China into a cohesive and united nation. Wrong again. Tom Yuen, Labour MP, said, Mao Zedong was a great leader, a brilliant revolutionary thinker, a great military strategist, but he got that right, an outstanding patriot. But above all, he was a man of the people. Wrong. He wasn't a patriot. Patriots don't kill their own people. He was a traitor to the Chinese people. Mick Young of the Labour Party said, with the passing of Mao, it has been a very sad year for China. The Chinese Communist Party was almost wiped out in the Long March of 1934 to 36. But these men won sufficient support within the country to be able to take over the government of the country in 1949 and be the first government in history to unify China and have the support of all the Chinese people. Wrong. The government never had the support of the Chinese people. It can be seen this as a gross falsification of history, like how in George Orwell's 1984, Winston Smith's job was to take capsules of news from the past and rewrite them to eliminate facts and substitute lies. The scary thing is, these morons who got up in Parliament and said these things actually believed it. The only few voices who spoke out against the motion were Liberal MP Billy Wentworth, a very libertarian Labour MP called Dick Klugman, and who refused to support the motion, and outside Parliament, Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen. There were three forces at work here. There were the pro-communist element in the Labour Party who supported everything the Chinese communists did, just like they supported the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese in the Vietnam War, Tom Yuen for instance, and Mick Young and Senator Bill Brown. All these people were just fellow travellers or quasi-communists, and the Labour Party and the union movement in Australia is still infested with quasi-communists. Then there were the morons like Doug Anthony who saw only dollar signs with all the wheat and meat their precious farmers could sell to China. He was prepared to send 500 Australians to die fighting communism in the Vietnam War, but he wouldn't give away $1 of trade to fight communism. And not long ago, the latest incarnation of appeasers, Malcolm Turnbull, made a speech in the London School of Economics called Same Bed, Different Dreams about Australia's relations with China, in which he described the Beijing regime as a contract with the Chinese people. A contract is an agreement entered into voluntarily by both parties. A dictatorship is not a contract. He glossed over the millions who were killed by Maoism, the one-child policy, the Tiananmen Square massacre, the organ harvesting, the mass starvation during the Cultural Revolution. Then there was a sinister equivocal attitude of people like Fraser, who looked at the great well-oiled, super-efficient totalitarian regime of communist China and somehow admired it, thinking, well, maybe that's the right way to run a country. These are the same kind of people who visited Germany in the 1930s after the National Socialists had taken over and looked around and said, this is a great place, there's no unemployment and the place is orderly. There's a close similarity between the German regime in the late 30s and China under the Communist Party now. We have a rigidly controlled one-party state dedicated to eliminating any opposition within its own borders, combined with a rampant, aggressive nationalism in foreign affairs. The only difference is Nazi Germany sought to extend its empire by purely military means, while the Chinese regime seeks to extend its empire by military means and by economic imperialism. And of course the Chinese communist regime has at its disposal the modern technology of mass surveillance, including facial recognition technology and internet censorship and nuclear weapons. George Bush Sr. was another culprit in facilitating the consolidation of the Beijing regime, because after the Tiananmen Square massacre, despite his public condemnation of the CCP's brutality, a high-level mission was quietly sent to Beijing to appease Deng Xiaoping. US Congressman Ronald Reagan in 2016 made it clear that Ronald Reagan would definitely have tried to stop Beijing's military action in suppressing the students in Tiananmen Square, and if he had been president, the results of Tiananmen Square might have been different. So George Bush Jr. overthrew a regime in Iraq that protected the Christians, the Saddam Hussein regime, and his father went out of his way to appease a regime that is wiping out Christianity and all other religions within its borders. George Bush Jr. created death, destruction and chaos in the Middle East by the invasion of Iraq, and his father gave a green light to Beijing's expansionism by glossing over the Tiananmen Square massacre. What a pair. As part of its economic imperialism, Communist China is setting debt traps for developing nations in the form of loans of little chance of being paid off. Djibouti, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, the Maldives, Mongolia, Pakistan and Montenegro are just some of the countries that are on the brink of becoming virtual Chinese colonies by financial default. Sri Lanka owes China $6 billion of loans. To defray that cost, in June 2018, China Merchants Port Holdings paid $84 million toward a $1.1 billion debt to equity agreement to take over maritime port operations in Sri Lanka, and launched its first naval jetliner November 18, 2010. The commander of US Africa Command, General Thomas Wadehouser, said at a recent Senate committee briefing, "It is no secret that roughly 98% of the logistic support for Djibouti, as well as Somalia and East Africa, comes through the port which the Chinese have just taken over. That port is one of the entities in the overall distributing port, and so our access there is necessary and required." Former US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson warned that the Chinese government encourages dependency using opaque contracts, predatory loan practices and corrupt deals that mire nations in debt and undercut their sovereignty, denying them the long-term self-sustaining growth. And just yesterday it was reported on the BBC that Chinese government is buying British steel. There is hardly a country in the world where the Chinese communist regime isn't taken over assets. And of course, with this goes political influence. The trouble is big business loves totalitarian regimes because they are easy to deal with, they don't tolerate strikes, and they used slave labour. This has been true ever since Henry Ford, founder of the Ford Motor Company, who was a rabid conspiracy theorist and anti-Semite, was given a special award by the German National Socialist Party. I used to work for the company that were major agents for all the garments and textiles coming in from communist China, and after the Tiananmen Square massacre that happened while I was still there, one of the managers there said it was actually better doing business there afterwards, because after the massacre, everyone in China was doing what they were told, out of fear. Big businesses that are losing money because of the riots in Hong Kong are probably waiting eagerly for Beijing to send in the tanks and crush the pro-democracy protesters so they can go back to making profits. The Tiananmen Square massacre, in which over 10,000 people were killed, happened in 1989. And if you wanted any more important evidence of what the Chinese Communist regime is like, in 1999 the regime decided to ban the Falun Gong spiritual movement because it had more adherents than the Chinese Communist Party and was promoting a philosophy contrary to the philosophy of the Chinese Communists. The regime started jailing Falun Gong practitioners and then found a way they could make money out of them by killing them and selling their organs for transplants. Falun Gong practitioners are kept in prison camps now like lobsters in a tank in a restaurant and killed on demand when their blood type matches that of a waiting recipient. This has been recently officially confirmed by an international tribunal convened in the UK, chaired by Sir Geoffrey Nice QC, who led the international prosecution of Slobodan Milosevic. The tribunal found in a new report that hospitals could request organs to be extracted on demand from prisoners in China without their consent. Under the present dictator, Xi, there's obviously a new aggressive move to wipe out all religions and all alternative philosophies that could challenge the ruling Communist Party, which is why the fast-growing Christian religion in China is being suppressed, and Falun Gong has been made illegal, and Tibetan Buddhism is being wiped out, and the Muslim Uyghurs of East Turkestan are having their culture, their identity, their language, and their religion obliterated. The recently retired Labour member for Melbourne Ports, Michael Danby, regularly spoke out against the Chinese Communist regime for its persecution of the Falun Gong practitioners and the occupation of Tibet. But apart from that, the only party that robustly speaks out against the horrors of Chinese communism are the much maligned Greens Party. This book, The Silent Invasion, which is about Chinese communist influence in Australia, was written by Clive Hamilton, a member of the Greens Party. Although I must admit there is a split in the Greens Party over China, because there's still a hardcore of ex-communists left in the party that don't want to criticise Beijing. Yet David Shoebridge, MLC in this parliament here, and Jamie Parker, the member for Balmain, have sponsored films and forums here in this very room and other parts of this Parliament House, like the recent film Letter from Masanja, exposing the brutality of the Beijing regime. And also it should be known that Clive Hamilton had great trouble getting this book published in Australia because the mainstream publishers were afraid of being banned from selling their books in China if they published anything critical of the Beijing regime. And this is another way the Chinese communists use economic imperialism to further their own cause. Airlines aren't allowed to operate in China, for instance, unless they call the Republic of China, Taiwan, Chinese Taipei, as if it were just another province of China. Whenever the Falun Gong inspired Shen Yun traditional Chinese dance and music show is put on. Local politicians get faxes from a Chinese Communist embassy telling them not to attend. Victoria University in Melbourne refused permission for the film that exposes the Confucius Institutes to be shown because they are so dependent on Chinese money. The prevailing economic philosophies of free trade, economic rationalism, privatisation, globalisation and deregulation all work to benefit the Chinese Communist regime. Free trade obviously benefits them with the large manufacturing capacity, partly based on slave labour. Privatisation benefits them because the only reason they can buy so many assets in countries like Australia is that those assets have been privatised. Globalisation benefits them because an open door economic policy means they can go anywhere in the world and take what they want. So all the economic stars have aligned in the past 40 years to the benefit of Beijing, while the same policies are causing havoc in Western countries. The main reason that house prices have been soaring out of reach of most people in Australia is cashed up buyers from communist China with unlimited funds. There is a real estate agent in Regent's Park near me. That's why I picked up this paper. You can see it's all in Chinese. Houses, units, commercial properties. These people have got a sign in their window saying, we have offices in Beijing and Shanghai. Of course, the economic open door policy that moves other countries to hand over their assets to Beijing only works one way. It is impossible for any foreigner to buy land or take over a business in China. Let's look at the stupidity of Western politicians and political movements in general and the attitude to China. The idiot Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, screamed Islamophobia and went around wearing a headscarf when some nut went berserk in a mosque and massacred Muslims in a mosque in Christchurch. But Jacinda Ardern is welcoming influence and investment from the most Islamophobic regime in the world, the Beijing regime. The Beijing regime is engaged in a modern-day Holocaust, destroying the culture and religion of the Muslim Uyghurs of East Turkestan, and has put about 1 million of them in concentration camps. What Brenton Tarrant did in the mosque in Christchurch is being carried out every day by the Chinese Communist regime in East Turkestan, and the whole world is virtually silent. And all the Muslim regimes in the world are silent, which shows how corrupt they are. Why isn't the BDS movement, which stands for Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Against Israel, calling for boycott, divestment and sanctions against Beijing for its occupation of East Turkestan and Tibet? The country that most oppresses women is Communist China. Under the Maoist one-child policy, women pregnant with their second child are dragged off to be forcibly aborted and sterilised. Even the Taliban and the Iranians don't do that. Why aren't the feminists who rail against President Trump complaining about that? I won't even mention that scumbag Paul Keating who calls Communist China a great state. I won't mention him. Why aren't these fake Christians like John Howard, Scott Morrison and Tony Abbott, and for that matter the Pope himself, railing against the destruction of Christianity in China by the Chinese Communist government? They say we can't interfere with the internal affairs of another country. Well, they interfere in the internal affairs of Afghanistan and of Iraq and Syria. After the concentration camps of Auschwitz and Belsen, etc. were opened up, the cry around the world was never again. It can never be allowed to happen again. Well, it happened again when the communists took over China, and under the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, and is still happening in China. The only positive thing I can say is that in America, even the Democrats, unlike the Labour Party here, are speaking out in support of Tibet and on other human rights issues in communist China. Hillary Clinton once wailed against the oppression of women with the one-child policy in communist China. I haven't heard Julie Bishop or Tanya Plibersek or Julia Gillard or Sarah Hanson-Young say anything. Yet they claim to support the rights of women. The Chinese issue is a real crisis for the whole world. Hong Kong dictator Carrie Lam, appointed by Beijing, uttered some eerie prophetic words a few days ago. She said the protesters couldn't win and they are the enemies of the people. 2 million people protesting in the streets in a country of 7 million are enemies of the people. So in the communist way of thinking, the people are the enemies of the people. This tells us what we are up against. It is no different to what we have been up against since Stalin's forced famine killed millions in Ukraine. The Tito communists killed the anti-communists after the end of the Second World War and threw their bodies into the caves in Slovenia. And the Berlin Wall went up. And the Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest in 1956 and Prague in 1968. And Pol Pot brought Cambodia, with the help of the Chinese communists, of course, back to year zero. What should we do? We have to undermine the Beijing regime. The riots and unrest in the streets of Hong Kong, I want to see those happening all over China. I want to see social unrest all over China. We can do that by undermining their economy, which is have complete import trade sanctions on China. If China wants to buy Australian iron ore and coal and wheat and dairy products, that's fine. But Australia should ban all imports from China. For a start, any manufactured product, especially cheap labour-intensive ones that come out of China, have a distinct possibility of having been made with slave labour. All these little Christmas trinkets you'll buy between now and Christmas, they'll all be made by slave labour. We should ban all Chinese investment in Australia, all purchases of real estate, private or commercial, farmland, joint enterprises, and of course, purchases of public facilities like ports. We should bend over backwards to let all the refugees from Tibet, East Turkestan, Hong Kong and mainland China into the country if they apply, and they can be proved, of course, not to be spies working for the Beijing regime. There should be no limit to the number of genuine refugees from those places. We should recognise Taiwan, Republic of China, as a free, sovereign and independent democratic country with full diplomatic relations, and the Australian government should lobby for the Chinese seat at the UN to be given back to the Republic of China, Taiwan. All the Confucius Institutes in schools and universities should be disbanded. The Confucius Institutes are staffed, financed and run by the Chinese Communist Party with the aim of whitewashing the communist history of China. Anyone entering Australia on a Chinese passport, whether tourists, businessmen or students, should be refused entry unless they are prepared to say they want the overthrow of the Beijing regime. A study of modern Chinese history for the 20th and 21st century, from the first Chinese Republic through the communist takeover right up to now, should be compulsory in schools so that they can all learn about the Chinese Holocaust, the millions who died during the communist takeover and the Cultural Revolution, how the Maoist economic system was a total failure. They should be taught about the Tiananmen Square massacre, the brutal one-child policy, the organ harvesting, the genocide of the Uyghurs, the subjugation of Tibet, and the way the Chinese communists backed the Khmer Rouge. They keep telling us China is important to Australia, so therefore all school children should be taught the truth about China, instead of brainwashing them with all this crap about global warming in safe schools. Instead of having transvestites stand up in front of school and give lectures on sex education, they should let survivors of the concentration camps in China and survivors of the labour camps get up in front of school children and tell them what the Chinese communist regime is really like. Thank you for being a wonderful audience.
Thank you very much, Bob Vinnicombe. That's the kind of talk which clears the air. And as they say in the States, you tell it like it is, don't you? That's okay. Now, the second speaker in tonight's panel is Mr. Warren Wang. Now, Warren Wang is a student of the Chinese Communist Party, and he's currently director of a mortgage brokerage company, and he is a dissident former member of the Chinese Communist Party in China. And he came to Australia 7 years ago, and because of his perspective as a former member of the CCP, he has become involved in Australian politics in issues which he believes are really important. And I'd like you to welcome Mr. Warren Wang, please.
Thank you all. Good evening. And my topic today is about this one, behind the Chinese contradiction. To start with, I want to show 1 minute video clip. It should be very entertaining.
Well, I think if they go in jail, there must be some reason. Well,
You don't think that the communist government is a little bit dodgy?
no. Oh, yeah. No, because...
Are you Aussie?
No.
You've got an Aussie accent.
Oh, well,
How long have you been in Australia?
9 years.
9 years.
Yeah.
You don't believe that the communist government do wrong?
No.
Many people are afraid of the Chinese government. Like me, I'm Chinese, right? I'm a mainland Chinese. If I say something bad about the government, my safety is at risk, I have to say.
What would happen? If I didn't cover your face now, what would happen when you went back
I
home?
get arrested, or my father or my mother will get like blackmail, you know, all this. I don't know. Everything's possible.
Do you prefer communism or capitalism?
Communism.
Communism.
Yeah.
Do you live here?
Yeah.
Why?
Because we're here to learn.
Oh, you're studying.
Yeah,
So
study.
you're going to go back after?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, so you prefer communism?
Yeah.
And you don't think that the government in China does anything wrong?
No. No wrong at all.
So putting people in jail for practicing religion is okay?
Yeah.
Freedom of speech, stopping people from protesting, it's okay?
Yes. Oh,
This short video clip I think it's very entertaining, but also very disturbing. I'm a big fan of this producer, and many of his videos present the same interesting contradiction among different groups of people. Well, my topic today is how to understand those self-contradicted patriotic Chinese living in Australia, or in general living in the Western civilization. It sounds so obvious that thousands of Chinese students coming to Australia every year, aiming to immigrate to this country permanently and transfer as much as their family assets to this country. I used to call this an Excel. It is not uncommon that the richest and the most powerful people in every socialist country either have their family moving to the Western countries or have Swiss bank accounts with huge balance. But on the other side, this generation